Good morning, third grade. This is Miss Glassy, and today we're going to complete Listening and Learning Lesson 5 for our Domain 11, Ecology. This listening and learning lesson is called Natural Changes to the Environment. Our targets for today are: I will explain how changes in an ecosystem are sometimes caused by natural events. We're going to review some vocabulary you'll need for today's read aloud. Our first word is devastating. Devastating means severe, extreme, causing great danger. An example would be, Joanna could not believe the devastating effects the hurricane had on her hometown. Drought. A drought is a prolonged period of little to no rain that causes damages to plants, animals, and people. An example would be, the drought caused the land to be very dry. Monsoons. Monsoons are seasonal heavy rains and strong winds in the Indian Ocean and in southern Asia. An example would be, heavy monsoons in Southeast Asia caused flooding and damages to the crops. Natural disaster. A natural disaster is a sudden event in nature that often causes terrible damage to affected areas. An example would be, a natural disaster such as an earthquake or tornado can be difficult to predict. Tsunamis. Tsunamis are large, dangerous ocean waves often caused by an underwater earthquake. An example would be, the earthquake that occurred in the Indian Ocean caused multiple tsunamis to hit the coasts of many countries, causing much damage and loss of life. What do we know? Recently, we learned that describing something as static means that it has little or no change. We also learned that ecosystems are not static. In fact, ecosystems change all the time as plant and animal species adapt to their environments. It is best when ecosystems change gradually. When change is gradual or happens slowly over time, plants and animals have time to adapt. Gradual changes to an environment allow Earth's cycles of energy to remain balanced, with one stable condition slowly changing into another stable condition, and very few disruptions to nature's cycles. We call this stable condition of gradual change the balance of nature. Sometimes change happens rapidly, affecting the cycles of life on Earth and upsetting the delicate balance of nature. This is often called upsetting Earth's equilibrium. These changes can be caused by nature or by humans. Today, we will hear about ways natural changes can affect the environment and the balance of life in an ecosystem. After listening to the read aloud, you will be asked to write a complete paragraph explaining how natural disasters can cause changes in an ecosystem. You will need to give specific examples of natural disasters and how they can affect or change ecosystems. You will want to use a piece of lined paper to take notes as you listen. You may set up your lined paper to take notes about habitats and ecosystems. You can see here that I've created an example of a note sheet. You may pause the video now and create a note sheet that looks like mine on your own lined paper. Make sure to include a column for the different natural disasters that we will hear about: earthquakes, floods, volcano eruptions, tsunamis, mudslides, droughts, and fires. And also make sure to leave plenty of room to take notes on the effect that each type of natural disaster has on an ecosystem. Pause the video now to make your note sheet. Please remember that as we listen, you can pause the video at any time to add to your note sheet. You can also go back and re-listen to anything that you need. Purpose for listening. Listen carefully to hear about how natural disasters can change an ecosystem. For months and months, no rain falls over the nation's farmlands. Without water, crops dry up and food becomes scarce. This is called a drought. It is a natural disaster. An avalanche begins at the top of a high snow-covered mountain, when the weight of new or drifting snow becomes too heavy for it to be held up by the snowpack. Another natural disaster. A hurricane forms over the ocean. Heavy winds and rain sweep inland, toppling trees and bringing floods to coastal communities. A natural disaster occurs once more. A volcano erupts, spewing huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the air, killing plants and animal life in its fiery path. Yet another natural disaster. Natural disasters are naturally occurring events that have always been a part of our changing planet, gradually altering its landscapes. The first natural disaster we're going to talk about are earthquakes. Listen to hear how earthquakes affect ecosystems. Earthquakes occur when stored up energy in Earth's crust is released, causing the ground to suddenly shake due to movement of rock deep inside Earth's crust or mantle. Earthquakes can be among the deadliest of natural disasters if they occur in areas where many people live. Generally, the most damage from an earthquake comes from collapsing buildings and fires caused by cracked underground gas pipes rather than from the quake itself. In largely unpopulated areas, earthquakes are much less of a threat to life. Even so, one way earthquakes affect an ecosystem is by changing the landscape. For example, earthquakes often cause cracks in Earth's surface, sometimes forming new valleys. As a result, heavy rains may fill up these new valleys with water, creating new lakes where there were none before. When this happens, a new ecosystem takes shape. Pause the video now if you have not already taken notes on how earthquakes can affect an ecosystem. Go back and re-listen if you need to. The next natural disaster we're going to hear about are floods. Listen carefully to how floods can affect an ecosystem. Floods occur when water overflows the banks of rivers, ponds, or seas. Heavy rains, snowmelt, or unusually high tides can all cause flooding across vast distances on Earth. Some areas of the world have seasonal rains called monsoons, during which it rains non-stop for days on end. Flooding is an expected natural event in those places. Periodic flooding may have had good effects on early civilizations in these areas because they affected the ecosystem by bringing nutrients to the soil and making it more fertile for growing plants. Nowadays, flooding is nearly always associated with disaster because it often destroys homes and villages. Sometimes, the water in the ecosystem becomes polluted, destroying the natural breeding grounds of fish and affecting the entire food chain of the area. If you have not already written down how floods can affect an ecosystem, pause the video, go back and re-listen. Volcano eruptions are the next natural disaster we're going to hear about. Listen carefully to hear how volcanic eruptions can affect ecosystems. Volcanoes are mountains formed by the ejection of lava, gases, and ash from an opening in the Earth's crust. You could say that volcanoes are like hills of fire. When heat and pressure build up within Earth, these hills erupt, and hot gases and magma, or hot molten rock, rise up from deep inside Earth's crust, mantle, and core, and come out of the volcano's opening. Once the magma is released from the volcano, it becomes lava, flowing liquid rock that moves across the ground until it cools and hardens into rock once again. When volcanoes erupt, they affect the environment because extra carbon dioxide, a gas, is released into the air. This gas can be poisonous to plant and animal life. Sometimes volcanoes also affect ecosystems by causing landslides, with loose dirt from the side of the mountain sliding down and burying everything around it. The next natural disaster we're going to hear about are tsunamis. Disease is often caused by natural disaster. Floods, hurricanes, and tsunamis all affect the environment by creating a breeding ground for mosquitoes. A tsunami is a large, dangerous wave, often caused by an earthquake. Some mosquitoes carry a disease called malaria. It can make both people and animals very sick, and many will even die from the disease. In places where there are many mosquitoes, people often put tents around their beds to protect them while they sleep. So you see, sometimes one disaster can lead to another. This is called a domino effect, just as tipping over one domino tips over all the other dominoes if they are lined up in a row. So one change in nature can cause several other changes to occur. Now, third grade, let's go back and think about what we learned about how tsunamis can affect ecosystems. I heard that tsunamis can create breeding grounds for mosquitoes because tsunamis leave standing water or large puddles of water. The mosquitoes breed in those puddles of water. Mosquitoes carry a disease called malaria, and the malaria passed from mosquitoes to animals and people they bite causes them to become sick, and many may even die. Natural disasters cause changes to landscapes and in turn to ecosystems. As Earth changes, food webs change too. The biggest change to food webs are caused by habitat destruction. Habitats are destroyed when necessary amounts of food, water, and shelter are no longer available to the population. Living organisms have specific needs. If these needs are not met, organisms will die or be forced to move to another habitat. Even disasters can be interconnected, just as everything on Earth is. The next natural disaster we're going to hear about are mudslides. Listen to hear how mudslides can affect ecosystems. Over many years, wild animals have adapted to respond to changes in the natural environment. Animals are dependent on plants to live and grow. Plants are dependent on nutritious soil to live and grow. The formation of soil is a very gradual process, requiring many, many years to build layers rich enough to support life. Natural disasters often cause imbalances to the soil, affecting the ability of plants and animals to survive. For example, a mudslide may occur after a heavy rainfall when the stabilizing soil is compromised. The soil becomes waterlogged, loses its structure, and slides downhill. Plants no longer have the soil they need to grow, and the food chain is affected. The next natural disaster we're going to hear about is drought. Listen carefully to hear how drought can affect the environment. We're going to hear several ways drought can affect the environment or ecosystem. When a drought occurs, ponds, streams, and puddles dry up. The earth cracks open from lack of rain. Without water, plants die of thirst, leaving nothing behind to hold the soil together. This results in wind erosion. Soil disappears from fields and is carried away by the wind. Sometimes, dust storms can form over hundreds of miles. When droughts occur, some plants and animals die, but others adapt to the temporary changes. Some trees shed their leaves early so that their leaves will not use up the water the plant needs to survive. Some grasses become dormant, going into an inactive state and turning brown to save water. Animals slow down too, conserving energy by moving around less. Nevertheless, food chains are always affected by drought. As plants dry up, there is less food for insects and rodents. Fewer insects and rodents means less food for carnivores. One change can cause changes to take place all along the food chain. Often, animals at the top of the food chain decide to take care of themselves, abandoning their young. Without parents to care for them, the dependent babies die. The balance of nature is out of whack. Third grade, I heard several different ways that droughts can affect ecosystems. I would go back and re-listen to the last 2 slides and make sure that you find at least 2 ways that droughts can affect ecosystems. Not only do droughts affect food chains, they can also lead to wildfires as well. Wildfires are the next natural disaster we are going to be talking about. Listen carefully to hear how wildfires can affect the environment. Wildfires may also be started by lightning or volcanoes, as well as drought. Wildfires can be devastating to human populations, burning down homes and businesses. However, after the fire is over, fires can actually be beneficial to the ecosystem in some wildlife habitats. In fact, some fires are started intentionally, on purpose, and are carefully controlled by humans. Ecologists know that fires are a natural occurrence, and that some habitats depend upon fires for their survival. For example, some pine cones remain shut until extreme heat opens them, releasing their seeds. Fires also promote fruit production, resulting in more seeds and berries for wildlife to consume. Some trees may die as a result of wildfires, but their decaying trunks provide nesting cavities for birds, as well as food for insects and decomposers. Large animals such as bear, deer, and bobcats rarely die in these fires. Their natural instincts steer them away from danger, and they flee the area until they sense that it is safe to return. The cycle of life resumes, and soon the balance of nature returns to the forest. So third grade, we just heard several ways that wildfires can actually help an ecosystem. Go back and listen again. How can wildfires affect ecosystems? How can they help ecosystems? Today you've learned about some of the natural changes to Earth's environment. The next time we're together, we'll talk about some of the ways that humans have changed Earth. Be prepared. In spite of our wonderful brains, we humans are not always too smart when it comes to taking care of our natural world. Third grade, you are now prepared to write your paragraph explaining how natural disasters can affect environments.